I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read.
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek. Okay. Willow Creek, a few years back.
Remember at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. And as always, we have to start off with a sort of a trigger warning. I am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. So if you are easily offended by having ideas challenged, or maybe by our satire, this is not a safe space for you. Today is December 15, 2020. And it is broadcast number 219. Joining us today on the Unknown Webcast is Steve Lagoon, president of Religious Analysis Service. I can't say that 3 times fast. And author of In Defense of Christmas. My name is Don Vino. And I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, and he's also our co-host. And we like to have him on because he makes me look good. Here is Ronnie, baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came outside their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. And we're having ourselves a 2020 Christmas here in Florida. Our sponsors for this webcast include World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet. And the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And of course, we must have our legal disclaimer on our guest on today's webcast. Insert name here. That's his name. His name is Steve Lagoon this time. Has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the One Unknown Webcast, hereafter referred to as the webcast, even though we will probably not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content, signed by our legal firm, the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And if you really enjoy our webcast or the satire or both, or if it just really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else, to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Greetings
and salutations, and thank you, Steve, for
felicitations,
and all of the above. And we are talking about his book today, which, if I can get over here, I'll show you what the cover at least.
I see it over your left shoulder.
You do, yeah. It is on. It's. I wish it was over my right shoulder, but it is In Defense of Christmas, and it is in the description below. You can click on the little description thingy mahoogie and order one up, and be prepared to do battle with whoever.
The thingy-mahoogie. Now,
yeah, the thingy-mahoogie.
You know, it in a day like today, it doesn't seem like there's much of a need for a defense of Christmas. How many people are really attacking it? Is anyone attacking it? Well, I mean, so we hear about the war on Christmas. Is that what you're engaging in this book?
No, not. Yeah, okay, yeah. And why did you write the book?
Right. I guess that's a roundabout way of asking that question.
Well, I like the way you ask it, but I just wanted to add that in there because there's.
Well, let's give him a chance to answer it. He's sitting there trying to answer right now.
I know. Well, okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I tell you, with those disclaimers, I was wondering if I should make any attempt at the use of satire, or should I leave it to you professionals?
Actually, it's fine with us. It's just you have to get your own law firm to represent you.
Well, the reason that I wrote this book is twofold. One is I've been involved with outreach to Jehovah's Witnesses for a couple of decades now, and I've become aware of the fact that they do not celebrate holidays. Foremost amongst them is Christmas. Although, interestingly enough, they used to celebrate Christmas in the early part of their history. Uh,
Interesting.
they used to offer the Watchtower as a great Christmas present.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
so
funny.
that was early on in the Watchtower's history. Uh,
Wow.
what better Christmas gift to give to your fellow international Bible student friends than the subscription to the Watchtower for Christmas?
I
So,
couldn't agree more. Well, actually, but I couldn't agree more with showing. Is that like something that's in print that we could copy and give to a Jehovah's Witness when they come to our
Yeah,
door?
sure.
That'd be
Absolutely.
great. Uh,
yeah. But to more specifically to your question of why I wrote it, I wanted to be able to respond to the basic arguments that the Watchtower promotes or puts forward against Christmas. But I also have come across quite a few times in my life devout, really sincere Christians who also have a problem with the celebration of Christmas. I was in a little Baptist church years ago, and we got a new pastor that came into the church, and he's made it clear, hey, we're not doing Christmas here. There's no Christmas trees, there's no Christmas decorations, we're not
wow.
Christmas songs, and he the reasoning that he put forward I thought was so horrible, but I wasn't a member of the church at that time, so I didn't think it was my place to get into a debate with that gentleman who was the pastor of the church. But I did decide that I need to study this out and have answers for those who really believe, who have bought into the way at least I would look at it, some of these bad arguments against Christmas. Now there are some legitimate reasons that people might not want to celebrate Christmas, and I honor that. And I recognize from the Book of Romans and other places that there are some things that are conscience matters that Christians can agree to disagree on, and certainly there's no command in the Bible that we have to observe Christmas or celebrate the holiday, but neither is there anything in the Bible that forbids or would prohibit a Christian from being involved in Christmas. And Paul talked about having respect for one another, not condemning somebody who's following their conscientious conscience on these sort of debatable issues. So, but I want to just dig in and take a serious look at the arguments pro and con against the celebration of Christmas, and that's where I landed with this book.
Hmm. Okay.
Well,
So,
and you know what? And to Ron's question a few minutes ago, I do find quite a few online, at least, who are sort of assaulting the idea that we are celebrating Christmas. True Christians would not celebrate Christmas. They would argue it is. You can go back in the Old Testament. You can find the whole concept of cutting down a tree and bringing it in, worshiping it. Well, I don't really go down and cut down trees. Number one, I don't worship it. Number two, for sure. So, I'm sure we're going to address those things because Steve has addressed them in his book as well. We also have those who are kind of shifting toward the Hebrew roots movement, who love to get on these kind of bandwagons and would say things like, "Well, Jesus didn't celebrate his birthday." Well, that's actually true. They didn't really celebrate birthdays per se in that culture. So it wasn't about Jesus particularly. It just wasn't something culture that Jewish people did in the first century.
That's very true. Josephus talked about the Jewish culture as not really observing birthdays. and many in the early church as well did not celebrate birthdays. That is true. That's a fact. But one of the concerns that people have expressed is that we don't want to bring undue attention or attention to somebody on their birthday. But on concerning Christmas, what better thing to do than to give honor to Jesus, because that is what we're commanded to do. That's what we're supposed to do as Christians, is to honor Jesus. So maybe an average person, I can understand where they say, well, I don't want to bring undue attention to them, but to Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, and God, yes, it seems quite appropriate to bring honor to him. And if you look in the gospel narratives of the Nativity in both Luke and Matthew, there's a joyful, celebrant feeling to them, that the birth of Christ was celebrated, and it brought joy to all, to all that were involved. And so I think when we celebrate Christmas, we are getting into the spirit of the New Testament and the joy that comes when the Messiah, God's Son, comes into the world, breaks into the world to bring salvation to all that will put their trust in him. So I think that's what we're doing with Christmas.
That's a really important thing. As I was doing some research on this, I came across things. For example, in around the 1600s, certain segments of the Christian church made it illegal to celebrate Christmas.
We're talking 1600s now?
Yeah,
Might have actually happened a little bit before then, but for sure the 1600s in England, if you're thinking.
Yes.
Rising. Yeah, now you're getting into my church background here.
Yeah.
And there are still folks around who would love to go back to that. I don't know, do you have in your book, do you cover the history of anti-Christmas Presbyterians and Reformed people and things like that?
Yeah, I got a little bit about that in there. Let's see, it's in my section 4, but it's definitely true that there were the Puritans were opposed to the celebration of Christmas and made it illegal, in fact, in the United States, in the part where the Puritans were, to observe Christmas, and people could be put in jail or fined.
Right.
But
it
helps to know why that was, though, because part of the reason is that in the Middle Ages, there were they were called Calathumpians. These people would go around, they'd go knock on your door, and they would, sort of like Halloween, where they do trick or treat, money or eat. Well, here in the Middle Ages of Christmas, bands of roving, what they called Calathumpians, would come to your door, and they would knock, mostly for the wealthy, they would knock on the door, and they would demand that you feed them a great feast, or they were just going to come into your house and take it over and be like a bull in a china shop. And so these bands will walk around on the streets and create havoc. And so the Puritans reacted to that. They did not like how it had become secularized and vandalized, maybe is another way to put it. And so they started to outlaw the celebration of Christmas based on that.
Wow.
And I have to say, I never heard that explanation before. Calathumpian, I had to look that up. Callithumpian, right?
Yeah, I'll have to look it up in my book here. What page did I have that on? Section 4, Pagan Roots. I'll find it for you if you're with me here.
The only argument that I'm aware of that's being used today and was used back then was that it, I guess it's a twofold argument that is especially it's still being used today. Number one, there are no holy days other than the Sabbath. That's what the Puritans were saying. To acknowledge anything other than what the Bible commands would be sinful. And it's like Christmas was, and actually Easter was as well. they were feast days in the Roman Catholic Church, and they were considered like halfway houses back to Catholicism. They were deeply fearful that people, by celebrating these, would be lured back into Roman Catholicism. And those arguments are still really being made today by some people. So, but the Calithumpian, that's pretty new to me. Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's, I have it on my book, and I'm dealing with my cat that has snuck in behind my.
Oh, I see.
So I'm hoping he doesn't cause me any trouble here. But yeah, page 121 of my book, I talk about this. For instance, during the Reformation, many Christians began to consider Christmas a pagan celebration because it included non-religious customs. During the 1600s, because of these feelings, Christmas. Yeah, let me move my cat out of the way here.
Oh yeah, you take care of the cat.
See, that's the problem. When you let the cat out of the bag, they just get into everything.
I made sure my dog was out of the room before I have a dog and a cat, and either one of them can be obnoxious when they suddenly decide they want attention.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's the attention. That's what I'm giving attention to this little square panel on top of the table, and the cat decided that she needs that attention away from that screen for herself.
Right, the little fur ball.
Yes. So, but I describe in my book the different periods of time in which Christmas came under attack by the Puritans in America and in Europe. And it's based on the Calithumpian type of activity, but it is also based on a concern about pagan association with the origins of Christmas. That was certainly a concern as well. That's why they were the Puritans. They wanted to be pure. They didn't want to have anything to do with something that might have a pagan connection. And again, they have every right to do that if they want, and there are such types of Christmas today.
As I understand it, though, that the pagan idea was definitely present at the time, like in the 17th century. But it was more of a Roman connection that they were afraid of, especially in England, because the Anglican Church under Henry VIII and his succeeding monarchs had kind of gone back and forth between, do we really want to be Protestant? Should we go back to the Roman Catholic Church? So there was this, and even to this day, there is a very strong Anglo-Catholic segment in the Anglican Church. And so the Puritans believed the answer to that was to just purge any and all influences out of the Church of England. But then later, I think it's 19th century, his name was Alexander Hislop, I believe. He came up.
The two Babylons.
The two Babylons.
Yeah.
Of course, that book is kind of problematic in that it does more than suggest, but it definitely suggests that the Trinity itself is derived from paganism.
Right.
So, it finds a lot of connections that I think are pretty, in other areas as well, that I think are pretty questionable. But that's when I see the shift from, we don't want to go back to Rome. We see the shifting away from those arguments primarily, at least, to shifting toward we want to look at all these terrible pagan connections that taint Christmas. So that is an argument that I think is influencing a lot more people today.
Well, it is, and one of the things that I think all three of us would agree on is the holiday in the United States, at least, and I think probably in other parts of the world, has largely become commercialized. You have more and more segments of commercial entities, for lack of a better word, that are adopting different ways to market merchandise. And this is the time of year when they make their big money, if they make money during the year. So The story The Night Before Christmas was an invention of the late 1800s. It was a poem.
Really?
It was a poem initially, yeah. Uh-huh.
I mean, it was it was connected to the commerce of the time. Is that what you're saying?
No, it was a poem that then was brought into being a more commercialized sort of a storytelling about what Christmas was about. Had little to do with the faith, and everything to do with the buying and giving of gifts and that sort of thing. So, Coca-Cola did a lot toward promoting all of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Their advertisement was very much involved in the popularizing of Christmas in America.
So then you come up to the reaction against that, and to me, one of the high points of reaction against that was the movie A Charlie Brown Christmas, where or the peanut was that what the name of the movie was? That's what I call it. Where they get the spindly little. I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Little tree.
Yeah.
But what was kind of interesting, the Charlie Brown Christmas is they really did tell the Christmas story in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I work at a senior care facility here in Minnesota, and one of our residents was an artist that drew the Ham's beer. I know you guys are big beer drinkers, and they
once a year.
Yeah, well, neither of us are Lutherans, so I don't think.
Anyway, but he was a friend of Charles Schultz, who also lived here in Minnesota.
Wow.
And he told stories about this, his friend, and it's well known now that when Charles Schultz originally was putting together the Charlie Brown Christmas special, that the big wigs at CBS were opposed to that scene in which Linus reads the section from the Gospel of Luke about the nativity of Christ.
Really?
They thought it was too religious. But Charles Schultz was adamant that it had to stay in. And of course, it's become a beloved part of.
Oh, yeah. It's one of the best scenes. Yeah. One of the best.
Story.
So, when you think of paganism, this is brought up a lot. Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, bring everything is pagan, birthday, celebration, everything's. Well, not everything, maybe. There are some things that they sort of go along with it, but pardon?
I was going to say everything is pagan, including the Watchtower organization itself.
Oh, really? It really is pagan. But one of our sponsors is tried to step up to the plate to sort of fix that, and so we have there we go.
Well, if you're gonna like start hacking away at what's pagan, where do you stop? So that's why our friends at Worlds on Theology Outlet have a message for us. It's a warning. By using the world's calendar, you are exposing yourself and those you love to pagan names of days and months, names that originated in the kingdom of darkness. It's time to just stop and get rid of that worldly calendar and switch to the non-pagan calendar. The non-pagan calendar does away with pagan weekday names. No longer will you use weekday names like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and so on. Instead, you'll use non-pagan weekday names like first day, second day, third day, fourth day, and so on. No longer will you be subjected to pagan month names that are all derived from pagan deities, just like the days of the week that we currently use. Instead, you'll use non-pagan month names like 1uary, 2uary, 3uary, and 4uary. So let's see how that would work in actual practice. Suppose we have a year in which Easter Sunday, another pagan day, falls on Sunday, April 16th. Well, not anymore. In the non-pagan calendar, this day will fall on first day, the 16th of Fourthuary. How about Christmas? Well, that's kind of a little bit dubious too in light of our subject for today. But let's say it falls on.
I think I've just been bumped off of it.
Bumped off? Is he, hold on a second there. Let's say that December 25th falls on a Monday. Well, on the new calendar, it would come as second day, the 25th of 12-year. Yes, you need the non-pagan calendar to get rid of all these pagan influences from your life, and it's only at World's End Theology Outlet. So, do we have Steve back?
I see him.
Oh, okay. Did you think you got bumped off for a second there, or what? Can you hear us, Steve?
I think he can't hear us. We can see him.
Steve, can you hear us? Oh, we can't hear him either. I did mute him for a minute, but I unmuted him, or somebody unmuted him.
Okay. Well, maybe he needs to go out and come back in again.
Can you hear? We need to send him a message somehow.
We don't know what he's saying.
Okay.
Oh, well, he did something. So that is kind of weird. I don't think we've ever had that happen before.
Not in that precise way. No, I don't think so. So I was going to ask him some questions because I have not actually seen the table of contents to the book. I think he's coming back in. Welcome back.
And I can hear you now. My apologies.
No, that's okay. I was going to ask you a couple of questions about the book. I assume it's a book that would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume it's a book that would be suitable to give to either, or to share with either a Jehovah's Witness, if they're open to reading it, or perhaps a Christian who feels very, like Christmas is not the thing that they should be doing. That do you cover both bases, and do you cover them in separate chapters, or how do you go about it?
It's more by topic, and the material about the Jehovah's Witnesses is mixed in different places. For instance, what you were just talking about in your satire was actually something that was put out by the Watchtower in the early publications around 1935. Clayton
Really?
was the publisher of, he was the editor of the Golden Age magazine, and they published what they called their Theocratic Calendar, which was an attempt to clean up the pagan associations with the calendar. And they had all new names for the months and the days that were sanitized. They called the modern calendar, they called that the devil's calendar.
Can you give me a link to that?
Well, I'll be glad to. The material is in my book here.
Okay.
I just
No, I can.
Where it
I
is,
can get
but
the book. Yeah, if it's in the book, then I know where to find it.
there you go. Yeah, it's in the book, but it's interesting. They had in 2 issues. They went through and promoted this new calendar, this new theocratic calendar that they were going to use because of the concern about pagan association with, the months of the year, Mars for March and so forth. But old, I forget his name right now, Judge Rutherford.
Judge Rutherford.
Joseph Rutherford.
He wasn't too fond of the theocratic calendar, and so it kind of died on the vine. And the Watchtower resorted to using the traditional pagan calendar that we all use.
That's interesting. So, in other words, they're willing to take this so far, but not, do they? I mean, isn't it technically pagan to say "Thank Jehovah, it's Friday"? Are we kind of mixing?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So as we go through this, Ron, we have he has a brief table of contents, quick reference, and then a longer one. And your section 1 is the biblical Christmas story examined. So you go through that from a biblical standpoint, and why is that important?
Well, I'm just going to give the reference to that pagan calendar, the theocratic calendar. That I found that information from James Penton, the former Jehovah's Witness who wrote his book, Apocalypse Delayed, the story of Jehovah's Witnesses. And he tells the story about that theocratic calendar on pages 66 and 68 in his book, Apocalypse Delayed, James Penton. So I give all the information in the book, but it's fascinating how they really did try to purify their calendar and ended up resorting right back to the one that they had called Satan's Bible or Satan's calendar. So, but if you wouldn't mind, for my benefit, asking that question again that you had just asked about the table of contents or something.
Oh,
the one I asked.
The first one was the Christmas story examined. So you
Yep.
deal with a biblical information. Why is that important? And kind of lay that out briefly.
Well, the reason that I did that is because just for my own benefit, when you have like a study Bible, you have little bits and pieces where you learn about what was Nazareth like or what was Bethlehem like. I wanted to put that all together in one place where it would be easily accessible for anybody that's interested in the subject to learn what was Nazareth like, what was Bethlehem like, what was engagement or betrothal like for first century Jews. And there's another section on where I take a deep look at the virgin birth, and I take a deep look at Luke's census. So I wanted to have that a really a good summary where somebody could just read through and learn the background of the Christmas story, looking at it from the perspective of real people. Mary and Joseph were real people, and I like to put myself in their shoes. You know, what would it be like for this young couple that's betrothed and they're in that period between the time they were betrothed and the time that they're going to consummate the marriage at typically about a year, and they're back and they're each in their homes getting ready for that, and then all of a sudden the angel Gabriel appears, the supernatural breaks through into the natural and appears to Mary and tells her that she's going to be the mother of the long-awaited Messiah. And she says, may it be as you have said. She is and many contrast Mary to the first Eve, who brought death because she didn't listen to God. In contrast that with Mary, the new Eve, if you will, who listened, who obeyed God, and because of that, brought about Jesus, who would be the Redeemer of the world, who would fix everything that was broken with Adam and Eve. So I mean, just little things like that. What was it like for Mary after she went down to visit Elizabeth in the hill country in the first 3 months of her pregnancy? Now she has to come back and she has to talk to Joseph and break the news. How do you tell your betrothed husband? And remember, betrothed in the Jewish culture, it took a divorce to escape a betrothal. So what is it going to be like for her to go to Joseph and say, hey, I'm pregnant? You know, from a human perspective, to say, God has, an angel appeared to me and told me that I'm going to have the Messiah. Well, that was hard for Joseph to accept. And he was going to send her away quietly, divorce her quietly in a very graceful manner until God again broke through and revealed to Joseph that he should don't be afraid to take Mary home as your wife. So, I mean, all these little details of the story, when you start looking into it, it's very fascinating, and that's what I had the joy of putting that all together in the book.
So, are you also concerned about those who might be attacking the historicity, whether it really happened, or is that part of what you're doing there?
Absolutely. As an apologetics ministry that I'm a part of, Religion Analysis Service, you see these criticisms of Luke and his accuracy. And so I took a deep look into his census that Luke describes in Luke.
Under Quirinius. That's controversial. Could you explain that to us?
I sure can. So looking at the Gospel of Luke in the second chapter, he says in verse 1, in those days Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So the critics charged Luke with inaccuracy because There's a well-known census that occurred in AD 6 that was supervised by Quirinius as the governor, but Jesus could not have been born in 86.
Right. Yeah.
The chronology. The problem is that, according to the New Testament, that Christ was born during the reign of Herod the Great, 37 to 4 BC. So it appears that Luke has made a mistake. Others call it a blunder, and he's 10 years off or so. And so how do you reconcile that is the question. And there's actually several different ways that you can reconcile it. And one of them is to say that there were two Quiriniuses. Some people argue that. I don't go that route, but some argue that it's not impossible that there could be two different people, like there were two George Bushes that were about 10 years apart. It's also possible that Quirinius governed on two separate occasions, and there is a thing called the Lapis Tibertinus that talks. It was an archaeological find found near Rome that describes a Roman governor that governed that area on two separate occasions. Unfortunately, the part with the name broke off, so they don't know which governor it was referring to. Ramsey felt that it was Cyrenius or Quirinius that was that governor. Others argue for Varus because it was found near his home. So we don't know, but it shows at the very least that it's not unusual, because we know that there was at least one Roman governor of the area that governed on two separate occasions. But there's also ways of resolving it by the translation of the Greek word prote, which is the word that is translated in NIV as the first. This was the first census. And if you just think about it, this was the first. Why did he say this was the first?
Right.
It almost implies that there was a second. And maybe, hey, you know about this later census in 86, but this was the first one. But prote can also be translated as before. And then it would read, this was the census before that took place under Quirinius. So it may be that it wasn't even a census that was oversaw by Quirinius. It might be just saying, hey, you know about the 86 census under Quirinius, but this was before that. This was a different, and that would make sense. So you can find ways of explaining it through other means than just assuming that Luke made a mistake. I like the view. I'm most impressed with all the people that I've studied on it, with the view of Ramsey and others who believe that Quirinius was a co-ruler sometime between, say, 5 BC and 3 BC, between that period, between 3 and 7 BC, somewhere in there, there is evidence that Quirinius did come into Syria to put down a revolt. And it would not be surprising if he was a co-ruler with either Varus or one of the other Roman rulers of the period. And there is actually a gap. It's not an absolute exhaustive gap. I mean, it's not an exhaustive chronology that we have of the Roman governors of that time. And there is a spot right around between 3 and 2 BC where it's possible that Quirinius was the governor then on a second occasion. It would fit. And you might say, but wait, what about the fact that Herod the Great was only the governor until he died in 4 BC? So that doesn't work. But actually, Jack Finnegan, a well-known chronologist, and some others are arguing that, in fact, that the chronology that has been long accepted may not be as accurate as it once thought, and it might be that Herod the Great actually lived until 1 BC, and that Christ was born around 2 or 3 BC.
Yeah.
Which agrees with what most of the early church fathers actually have taught.
Yeah, I came across that alternative date for Herod's death and the birth of Christ is promoted in the movie The Star, about the Star of Bethlehem. Maybe you've seen that one?
I have not saw that, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, a lawyer, Christian lawyer. I think he's in Houston. This movie came out several years ago. I think it still has a website, starofbethlehem.com or something like that.
Sure.
So yeah. Anyways, that's
I
Cool.
mean, if you read Finnegan's book, he
yeah.
makes a very compelling case that for Herod's death in 1 BC and that Christ's birth was in 2 or 3. So
That's is that
you,
the Handbook of Biblical Chronology book? Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good book.
and it doesn't prove it, but he makes a strong case for it. I'll say that.
All right. So in your first two sections, section 1, section 2, you're really kind of dealing with the biblical and historical data around that time to answer those kinds of questions. Then you come into the origins of the Christmas holiday, section 3. How did it develop? I mean, was it a response to paganism trying to syncretize pagan practices with Christian practices to try to bring more pagans into the church, or what's going on? How did it develop?
Well, among professional historians, there is a huge debate going on in the last generation about that very question. And there's two schools of thought that have developed. And the one that you just referred to, that it kind of grew out of paganism, that the church just shrewdly, cleverly adopted the date and some of the customs associated with the worship of Mithraism or Sol Invictus or the Saturnalia. That view is known as the history of religions theory, or HRT. And the history of religions theory is the predominant view among reference materials that you'll read on the subject. If you open up most any reference material, it will argue for and state it as though it's a fact that that's what the church did. It just adopted the pagan holiday and Christianized it. And that's the history of religions theory school. And but it is being challenged now by another group that's called the calculations theory, or CT, the calculations theory. And the calculations theory basically argues that the church did not adopt the December 25th date or the Christmas holiday by Christianizing the pagan holiday, but rather argues that the early church actually believed that Christ was born on December 25th, and that's why the date was chosen, and that there's historical reasons to believe that. And so that is the view that I certainly have adopted, that I think makes the most sense. Now, it doesn't ultimately matter whether Christ was born on December 25th or January 6th or April, or I mean, there's advocates for every month of the year. It doesn't really matter that we celebrate Christ's birth on any day of the year or every day of the year. It doesn't matter. So I'm not saying that this is something that has to be, but the fact is that the early church did believe, at least many of the leaders in the early church believed, that Christ actually was born on December 25th. And a prime example is Hippolytus, around the year 235, in his commentary on Daniel, specifically laid out his view based on a chronology. They argued that that Christ's genesis, his conception, was on March 25th on the Passover. And then 9 months later, that's why they call it the calculation theory, because that's what Hippolytus and the other church fathers did, is they calculated 9 months out and came to December 25th. And so the calculations theory advocates say that is why. Now, the two schools of the historians that are arguing this, they're not really arguing whether Christ was in fact born on December 25th. They're just arguing, why did the church adopt that date? And was it
Right.
they adopted the pagan view, or was it based on their own calculations and beliefs and historical records that Christ actually was born on December 25th?
Right. Well, but that is an important question. If the early church adopters, let's say, began celebrating on whatever date it was, did they do so because of trying to bring in pagans. Now, that would be a really bad reason to celebrate the incarnation. If
Right.
they're doing it because they believe that the biblical data brings you to that idea, then you go, okay, well, at least it's rooted in the biblical story, let's say, even though it's not commanded. We admit that. We're not even saying that you should or must celebrate Christmas. We're not even saying that. I have friends that have come from other countries that are Christian. They grew up in Christian homes. They are evangelical, born again, do not celebrate Christmas. And we honor that for them.
Sure.
And by the same token, they don't insist that we stop because it's somehow paganized. They do realize that we have good reasons for the celebration of the incarnation, which is what we're emphasizing.
Yeah.
We're not emphasizing anything else, just the celebration of the incarnation.
Now, Harold Honer, a former professor at Dallas Seminary, wrote a book a long time ago, and you're already nodding your head. I think you already know where I'm going. Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ, right?
Great book. Yep.
Great book, yeah. And I, in a couple of different years, and I might do it again this Sunday, I teach an adult Sunday school class, and I have the materials all lined up to take an adult Sunday school class in one of several directions in honor of Christmas. But when I include his material, he makes a really interesting case that, that it could have been in the winter. Maybe December 25th wasn't the exact date, but he looks at all the arguments from those who say, oh no, it could not have been then, it couldn't have been in the winter, and he analyzes them, and I'm now more confident that, at least let's put it this way, I'm more confident that December 25th is not way off base necessarily. Are the arguments you hear, especially from the Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're just getting these from other people, the idea that he was born in the month of Nisan in the spring. Those arguments don't look as compelling to me as they used to look. I used to grant, if I ever got into a conversation with Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm not going to make a big deal out of what month Jesus was actually born in, but neither am I going to let them push me around anymore and say, oh, if you believe in December 25th, you're just capitulating to this paganization of Christianity. No, Harold Honer now he passed away, I think, within the last few years. He's a major New Testament scholar. He had an epic commentary on the Epistle to the Ephesians. And this work that he did back in the 70s is, other than Finnegan's book, I can't think of any book I'd recommend more than his Chronological Aspects of the Life of Christ.
Well, that book is a prized possession for me. I've turned
Yes.
it times. It started out as an article, I think, in Biblio Sacra or whatever
Bibliotheca Sacra.
But here's the thing: the first place that you hear about December 25th date, because it's standard to say the Christians took the December 25th date from the pagans.
Right.
But the problem is there's no evidence that
No.
they used that date.
Zero.
Right.
Or the Christians used it for Christmas, because the first place that it's mentioned for either one using December 25th is in the same document that was published in Rome in 354 called the Chronography, and it has the feast dates of the year for that year, 354, and it mentions Sol Invictus as a feast date on December 25th, but it also mentions Christmas on December 25th. So it's the same source in which both are found. So you can't really argue that one was before the other, because you have no reason. It's just a total assumption to say that they borrowed it from paganism. There's no records other than the same one in which Christmas is to show that the pagans celebrated something on December 25th back in the 3rd or earlier. It doesn't happen. So,
well, one of the questions that sometimes comes up, just as we talk about a whole variety of issues, is how do you really get to your church doctrine? Do you take it from Scripture, or is there another source that you can go to to develop that. And one of our sponsors has come forth to help us with that. Ron, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Okay, start over.
Okay, all right. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take this whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you should check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans fat-free, and truth claim-free, and all their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat. And even in this pandemic environment, they're always open with Bible Buffet carry-out. This week's regular Sunday specials include Arian appetizers, Sabellian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, and Pelagian pie. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is a fully accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. And it should be Steve's too.
And it should be Steve's too. And we're talking about his book, In Defense of Christmas, which you can get at Amazon. If you go down into our link section, description section, you will see a link right there. You can go and get that and order it right up. So as we move along here, and because we are moving along.
I wonder if I could jump in with one more thing about the origin of Christmas.
Well, you could try.
There's something I think is important for your viewers to be aware of. That was something that I was not aware of before I started researching it, is that before Christmas, there was another holiday that celebrated the birth of Christ, and that was called Epiphany. Epiphany means appearance or revelation. And the early church started observing from about the beginning of the 3rd century on, from about the year 200 or even earlier, some sources say, the holiday of Epiphany. And it celebrated all things related to the Nativity, including the birth of Christ and the visit of the Magi. It was all kind of thrown together into a holiday called Epiphany. And this was celebrated in the early church before there was the holiday of Christmas. So even though Christmas itself as a festival developed in the 3rd and the 4th centuries, the Christian church was already celebrating the birth of Christ in the Festival of Epiphany from at least 200 on. And I think we need to know that, and some scholars argue that that was the reason for the delay in the adoption of the Christmas festival, which was more focused on just the birth and not the birth and the Magi and some other things. So we should, the way I look at it anyway, is to say, hey, it's the Christmas surely maybe did develop in the 3rd and the 4th century, but Christians were already celebrating the birth of Christ as a holiday since the 2nd century. And in fact, you can find evidence that Christmas, the birth, I should say, of Christ was celebrated in the church with songs like Gloria Excelsis Deo. Ace Collins, in his book, documents how Pope Telesphorus commanded the church in 130 and forward to be singing on Christ's birthday. He doesn't say when it was, but on his birth that they are to sing Gloria in Excelsis Deus and other songs. So almost from the beginning, you can trace it back to apostolic times that the church, whether they celebrated it on January 6th, which was Epiphany, or whether they celebrated on the December 25th, the early church from the beginning observed and celebrated with joy the birth of Jesus Christ in this world.
Well, and even you talk about holiday. I just want to put this out because some people may not realize this, that we have kind of rewritten how we pronounce that, but it meant holy day. And it's been kind of reduced to be holiday at times to just go out and hang around and barbecue or whatever. But it was really a worshipful time, a holy day set aside for devotion to the Lord and celebration of something in different times of the year. This one happens to be the birth or the actual incarnation, because as Christians, we believe that God, in the form of the Son, took on human nature, which included a fleshly body, to live a life that we could not live, to die a death that we rightfully deserve, and then resurrect himself from the dead. So there's a big package here, which brings about the redemption of mankind for those who embrace the gospel.
Yeah, that's why Christ came into the world. And I have a section in my book, bless you. I have a section in my book about the virgin birth because, as you all know, that's come under great attack. Going back to the great fundamentalist modernist controversies, and the great champion of the virgin birth was Gresham Machen, the great theologian, Presbyterian theologian. But I document in my book that even in some of supposed evangelicals are getting weak in the knees on the doctrine of the virgin birth. And I think it's an essential doctrine of the faith that we have to stand for. And so I kind of did a review of where we're at on this debate about the virgin birth, and made the case biblically and theologically that that we should stand strong on the virgin birth of Christ.
Well, we've mentioned several times Machen's book, 1923, Christianity and Liberalism.
Yep.
And I think it's a classic. I think every Christian should read it, actually, because the arguments he's going through basically are liberalism may be religious, but it's not Christian, and here's why.
Yep.
But we keep revisiting that thing. Today they call themselves progressives, but really they're advocating the same kinds of things that Machen was fighting against in the 1920s.
That's right, and he had a book called The Virgin Birth too, in which he completely destroyed the arguments of the liberals of that day, and it remains a classic on the subject.
Right. All right. So responding to critics, basically, we're kind of going through that to do that now. What sorts of things do they raise up that you think, okay, you need to know how to respond to this issue? We have just about 2 or 3 minutes left here. So go for it.
Well, some of the critics of Christmas, we talked about the pagan roots, which I don't believe are true. Christmas is a time of excess in moral behavior, and I agree that can be true. It can be abused. So anything can be abused, but that doesn't take away from the goodness of the thing itself.
Right.
And so just because some people watch football and get drunk on Christmas doesn't mean that I shouldn't observe the birth of Jesus Christ. That's my feeling. And similarly, some argue that it's been too secularized. And I guess that shouldn't surprise us. So we live in a culture where a good percentage of the population isn't Christian or not dedicated born-again believers. And so we shouldn't be surprised that they have secularized it with Santa Claus and other things. But let's not forget, trying to go quick here, St. Nicholas was a bishop of Myra, a real Christian who was at the Council of Nicaea defending the truth. He was a confessor who suffered under the Emperor Diocletian's persecution of the church. So I always tell people when they ask me about Santa Claus, I tell them, hey, St. Nicholas was Jesus' friend. He was a dedicated Christian bishop, and emphasize that part of it. I better stop and see where we're at here.
No, well, yeah, I just want to say one thing, and then we'll ask Ron to march us out of here. And that is this. Even in Scripture, on something like the Lord's table, what we don't find Paul doing is saying, make sure that all of the pagans around you are also partaking. He doesn't say that. He doesn't even allude to that. What he does say is you shouldn't act like pagans that get drunk and mistreat each other, right? This should be a time honoring the Lord. Our celebration of the day, or the season even, is the remembrance of the incarnation. That's what we're to point to. Whether you include a tree or not include a tree as you go through the spirit of the season is really not the issue. Most of that symbology actually came out of Christians using it in various ways, and you deal with that in your book.
And I'll put in there that in Isaiah he talked about the Christmas greeneries, not Christmas greens, but greeneries being in the temple in the Old Testament long before the pagans were using it in Sol Invictus or Saturnalia.
Okay, so it's a good book. There's a lot of information in there, and again, go in the description box, order it up, and Ron, if you would Steve, thanks for being with us. Hold on a second, while Ron walks us out of here.
All right. Well, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is O.D. Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance, Wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, ever. So, Steve, hold on. Ron, I know you're rushing out of here, but we're going to say to everyone, adios and see you next week.